It had been well established among the scholars and scientists of the Zaldi species that no planet with a large quantity of water could ever possibly support life. This substance, though essential in moderation, was simply too rich in oxygen for any entity to exist in such an inhospitable environment. The Zaldi themselves, like every other species on their harsh and cold homeworld, had crawled from the primordial soup of methane pools many millennia before they ever took to the stars. Nothing, it was assumed, could ever evolve from a pool of pure water. The first major scientific endeavor of the Zaldi, taken by their world's first emerging global power, was the genetic engineering of a life form that could survive in an ocean of salt water, an organism that consumed oxygen and produced methane, essential to the survival of life on its homeworld of Atleb. After 50 years of constant study and an incalculable sum of resources, the first beings had been created that could survive the unsurvivable. Such hardy forms of life, single-celled microbes that consumed sunlight through photosynthesis, were even capable of enduring time spent in the vacuum of space. The Zaldi species, having engineered life that could endure in the two deadliest environments they knew, thought themselves an intelligent race, a learned race, a race capable of surviving and even thriving almost anywhere. With their ability to endure, to expand, to explore, the conquering of space seemed only a natural next step. Rockets roared into the vacuum of space. Astronauts donned bulky suits, stepping onto the launch gantries to the sound of cheering throngs. Space stations were established. Space elevators came next. Then came the expansion. Their star system's 12 worlds were surveyed, charted, and colonized. 11 contained water. 1 contained life. That one inhabited world, Atleb, had not a single lake or sea of water anywhere on its lush surface. That settled any debate that Zaldi science might have had. Water, in large quantities, could not coexist with any form of life. It was impossible. The Zaldi species reached out to grasp the stars, utterly confident in the accuracy of their greatest scientific blunder. They colonized and terraformed 11 worlds, rich in water and with oxygen atmospheres, entirely certain that no life could ever exist in such a welcoming environment. Had humanity arrived decades earlier, they might have been there to appreciate the irony. The first thing to correct the Zaldi's greatest error was, unsurprisingly, a space probe from another star. A single, small utilitarian vessel, its construction reminiscent of the Zaldi's own first tentative steps into orbit, but its origins speaking of a race many times more advanced than they. Immediately, ships were dispatched to intercept. Fusion trails glowed blue in the dark. They transmitted a sequence. The first 14 prime numbers, for the Zaldi were base 14. They received the same sequence back, followed by the first 10 prime numbers, base 10. Then they exchanged other basic concepts, universal things that could bridge any linguistic gap. It took 6 weeks before spoken communication was established. Basic knowledge was exchanged, studied, and exchanged again. Linguistic databases were compiled and revised. Soon it was time for the Zaldi species to test the one maxim their science held most dearly. The one maxim built entirely upon their ignorance, that water, in large quantities, was the anathema of life. Atleb is 78% land, 20% methane seas, the flagship transmitted. 2% comprised of water. What is your world's composition? The answer that came back destroyed the very concept of life as the Zaldi knew it. All of Zaldi science suffered a blow from which it would never recover. 29% land, the space probe transmitted. 71% water. There was silence on the deck of the Zaldi flagship. The ship's commander, a being with a carapace not too dissimilar to a large and jagged rock, paced the command deck, as his kind often did when they were thinking. Lesser crew members sat at their stations around it. "Translation error," snapped the commander, as its flawed logic came up with the best explanation it could. "Revise the models." "We apologize," typed the ship's xenobiologist, before remembering that no such concept had been shared between them. "We had an error," it finally transmitted. "Wait for it to be repaired." "Understood," the human ship transmitted back. "What is the nature of your error?" The biologist looked at its commander. It received no orders. "Translation error. Correcting now." It tapped anxiously on its console with 8 of its 12 limbs. Zaldi crews, unlike their human counterparts, sat in recessed holes that were covered in equipment. This exploited their wide field of view and their many manipulator limbs to its fullest extent. "Confirm 71% water?" "Confirm," said the human ship. 71% water. We'll send aboard a capsule with the same water/land ratio." When the biologist reported this to its commander, it received high praise. "This will resolve the error. No life can exist on such a world." "What if it can?" asked the biologist, tapping its limbs on the deck. "What next?" The commander looked mildly amused. "Creatures hailing from the vacuum of space?" Its subordinate biologist was a little offended at its casual dismissal. The most key principle of science was that no idea, no matter how outlandish, could be dismissed outright. "It is an interesting theory, to one with a science-inclined mind, but only that, a theory." "Everything is a theory," the biologist countered, "until it's not." The human starship launched a space probe. This one, a common design in human space, was far more streamlined and elegant. It reminded the Zaldi astronauts of their own ship, in a way. The Interstellar ship was the first of its kind, a crude, inelegant vessel meant to take humanity's first clumsy steps into a new frontier. The probe it carried within it was just another one of thousands. "Probe incoming," reported the census officer. "Ready the manipulator arms." Every Zaldi vessel had a series of manipulator arms, always in multiples of 8, that could be controlled by one or more manipulation officers within the ship. Decades of technological refinement had nearly eliminated their need to perform spacewalks. Such were the abilities of these arms. It was even said that an officer in the United Fleet spent more time in a spacesuit during training than it ever would in real service. More often than not, this was true. 30 lengths, reported one of the flagship's 2 manipulator officers. 20, 10, contact. 3 white manipulator arms grabbed firmly onto the space probe. One took the capsule from its claws. "Bringing the capsule aboard. Releasing the probe." The commander rushed to the ship's main airlock. A team of technical and scientific officers were already on standby there. There was an elite unit of scientists coming here from Adleb, but they were still many weeks' travel away. This ship was, for now at least, the best the Zaldi had. "Bring the laser cutter," the commander ordered. "Wait for my orders to cut open the capsule." 2 technical officers fetched a powerful laser cutter from the storage closet. If it was not properly handled, its laser was able to cut through even the hull of the ship. It, like all United Fleet equipment, was sterile, high-visibility white. "Cut a small hole in the capsule for a scanning device," instructed the commander. "And bring me the census officer." As ordered, it was brought, and scanning gear was brought as well. The hole was cut, and the scanning device was placed inside it near instantly. The crews of the United Fleet prided themselves on their professionalism. "Impossible!" gasped the sensors officer. The commander shoved him aside to look at the readings. "Use a different scanner," it snapped. "This one's defective." If the biologist had been there to look at the readings, it would have been clicking with joy at the sight. As commanded, the sensors officer brought a new scanning device. Then another. Then another. All showed the same readings. "Commander?" it asked, confused. "This doesn't make any sense." 71% water, the commander murmured, taking a step backward and chittering nervously. "Impossible." In the face of this revelation, the destruction of its very understanding of life itself, Its duty to the Zaldi species took over in an instant. "Contact Fleet Central," it snapped. "Immediately." At Fleet Central, the headquarters of the United Fleet of the Zaldi species, the fleet's Grand Commander was awoken from its period of brief hibernation. Lying motionless on a sealed deck, for Fleet Central was a massive space station and not bound to any planetary body, it was absorbing nutrients through photosynthesis before being awoken by a party of high-ranking officials. "Grand Commander, there's been an update on the human situation." Within minutes, it was dressed, prepared, and briefed on the situation. Within minutes more, it had gone to meet with its colleagues in the fleet hall of the massive space station. "Friends, colleagues, esteemed scientists, our knowledge of the universe is irreversibly shaken." A cluster of hundreds of Zaldi, all elite specialists in highly respected fields, crowded around it to listen to it speak. "We are receiving reports, confirmed by the United Fleet, that the human species evolved on a world 71% submerged in water. The impossible has become possible. The unknown is now known. We stand as we have stood since this probe's arrival, beyond the borders of Zaldi knowledge." The logo of the United Fleet, an astral map of 12 planets around one yellow star, was emblazoned on the wall behind him. "We are lucky enough to have the chance, unprecedented in our species' history, to lay the very foundations of a new, modern form of science." Representatives from each of the 12 Zaldi planets, each forming a separate nation, stood in their enclaves. The United Fleet, meant to present a united pan-Zaldi front to any external challenge, was a supranational organization that recruited from these 12 nations. To prevent conflict between them, it was written in law that no spacecraft could be operated by any power but the United Fleet. Exceptions, though there were some, were hard to conceal and cause for punishment if discovered. Warships of the United Fleet had destroyed such illicit craft many times before. "How can we tell they are telling the truth?" asked one representative. "You should have warships intercept the craft." The Grand Commander looked mildly amused at this suggestion. "Representative, these aliens are an interstellar civilization. An inexperienced one, if their design of ship is any indication, but still a power far beyond any the Zaldi species can bring against them. Even their engine plume could likely shred our warships to molten metal." "I concur with the representative," said another. "We cannot trust them without further evidence." And then another voice added its approval to the chorus, then another, until 10 of the 12 Zaldi worlds formally committed to a military intervention. The United Fleet, for all its power, was still bound to the will of the planetary representatives. A squadron of 14 warships, all the Zaldi fleet possessed, and all it had ever needed before this day, burned hard to intercept the human interstellar craft. The Grand Commander, after many tiring discussions and conferences, was finally given its leave to return to hibernation. Zaldi hibernated for many days, remaining awake for many days at a time as well, and the commander had been woken too early to allow for a full cycle. It lay down on the deck of its hibernation quarters and watched the fusion trails of warships streak across the stars. 14 ships, hundreds of lives, all under the Grand Commander's responsibility. It wondered if it were sending those crews to their deaths. Several days came and went. The United Fleet warships roared ever closer. The human ship proposed an in-person meeting. After this meeting, when representatives of the two races would shake hands in a human gesture of friendship, the humans would have to return to Earth. "We have been gone too long," the ship explained. "There is no way to communicate with Earth besides returning." "We understand," the Zaldi flagship transmitted back. Its commander was still pacing the deck, though its civilian escorts had since departed to perform other duties. "We request information," the commander said. "Technology. We are prepared to barter resources in exchange." "We are unable to comply," the human ship transmitted. There were but 3 crew within, compared to the Zaldi ship's 50. The United Fleet flagship carried no weapons, but their manipulators could be used to strike objects, and their laser antenna was powerful enough to melt through steel. If they wanted, they could have easily overpowered the 3 humans in their flimsy spacecraft. Yet they did not. "Understood," said the commander. "Tell the humans to make preparations for our meeting." To the Zaldi, large-scale war was an alien thing, as alien as a world of water, in fact. The flagship's commander would not be the one to discover both of these unknowns. The meeting began at humanity's request. 3 humans, the crew of their interstellar craft, drifted out of its airlock and maneuvered themselves toward the Zaldi ship. 3 Zaldi, the commander and 2 officers, donned spacesuits to meet them. The Zaldi suits, like their ship, were pure white. They had clumsy jets attached to each of their manipulator arms for propulsion, and individual plastic domes over their many eyes. The humans wore similar suits, mostly white, with blue markings and a design on each one's chest depicting what the commander knew to be the flag of Earth. The United Fleet crew carried no banner with them. The Zaldi race did not use flags. The 2 parties stopped, facing each other, and the Zaldi commander extended an arm for a handshake. It was not accepted. Instead, the human commander pointed at himself. "Abdul Rafiq," he said. "I am from New Zion, on Earth." "Leopold Schultz," said the man to his left, tapping his chest. "I am from Tranquility Base, on Luna." The commander knew from its dealings with humans that their race had very few colonies beyond their home planet. None were terraformed like the Zaldi worlds. It briefly wondered if it could trade the terraforming microbe, invented before even the idea of spaceflight to survive in the harshest conditions, in exchange for the secret of interstellar travel. "Yang Yan," said the last remaining human, also pointing to herself. "I am from Beijing, on Earth." The Zaldi commander tapped itself once, in a crude imitation of the human gestures. "Stali," it said. "I am from Initial Colony on Teleb, though I no longer claim that nationality." All members of the United Fleet had to renounce their previous loyalties before joining, and swear a new oath of loyalty to the Zaldi species as a whole. "Tzin," said its second. "I was born on Explorer 3, a craft in the United Fleet." Those born in space were considered true Zaldi patriots, unshackled by the bounds of planetary nationality and indoctrinated from birth to believe in the ideal of Zaldi unity. Alxiv, the lost Zaldi crew member, tapped its spacesuit. "I'm from Fleet External, governing station of the Outer System Fleet." Fleet External and Fleet Internal governed and administered the Outer and Inner System fleets, respectively, and deferred to Fleet Central for all matters of great importance. The human commander, Abdul, extended his hand. The Zaldi officer, Ztali, recognized it immediately. It grasped Abdul's hand tentatively in one of its manipulator arms. "In the name of friendship between our 2 species," Abdul said firmly, shaking its hand. The oxygen atmosphere in the human suit would kill a Zaldi in seconds. The methane atmosphere in the other would suffocate Abdul fatally if he breathed it in. The vacuum surrounding them would kill them both, regardless of species. Stali, representative of 10 billion souls and his species as a whole, spoke the motto of his beloved United Fleet. "May we go, united, into the stars." 2 months passed before the human ship's return, 2 months which the Zaldi species did not spend idly. Zaldi biologists clamored for answers, for reasons to explain why their science had been able to remain so wrong for so many decades. The first aliens they met had left shockwaves rippling through Zaldi society, throughout every social and political circle and every walk of life, but none was struck so hard as the sciences. The head of the United Xenobiological Commission, a barely relevant organization up until very recently, resigned in disgrace when it heard the news. Its successor, a bright young scientist from a colony in the outer system, took fast to revising every calculation the Commission had ever made. Humanity's exobiological knowledge, as hypothetical as the Commission's own, now appeared a far more accurate model. High quantities of water were not, as previously believed, incompatible with the germination of life. On the contrary, in fact, humanity indicated that it was practically required. And so it was that the Zaldi stood in humanity's shadow, lesser in number, lesser in population, lesser in industry, lesser in science, dwarfed in nearly every aspect of existence by these anomalies, these beings that came from a world they knew meant death to prove just how ignorant their species truly was. The commander of the United Fleet, in a defiant address to the nations of the Zaldi, demanded that this state of affairs not stand. In a vote of 11 to 1, only their ancestral home of Atleb demanding independence, the Zaldi nations were unified under the banner of the Zaldi unity. Atleb found itself blockaded, starved from the interplanetary commerce that had been its lifeblood these past decades. After a month and a half of this bloodless siege, United Fleet warships hovering in orbit as if to mock their apparent impotence, the planetary representatives conceded to all demands that were made. When the human race returned to meet their friends, bearing gifts of technology and understanding beyond any they had ever known, they found a species that had advanced overnight. "Greetings," was the first transmission sent to humanity's ambassadors. They were in a similar model of aircraft to the last one, comprised of a jumble of spacecraft equipment welded around a colossal negative energy drive, but it was bigger, more powerful, and far better equipped to the task it would undertake. This vessel, the United Earth starship Venturer, was in dry dock for a year before the news of alien contact was broken. Its purpose was to survey the one potential colony mankind had seen, an ocean world peopled with vast and myriad forms of life, and assess the possibility of human habitation. Mare infinitum, they would call it, the infinite sea. We are humanity. The new venturer now broadcast to a people who would never swim in such a sea, a people whose primitive science denied Mare infinitum's very existence. We come bearing gifts. The Zaldi unity's response was swift and excited. Their flagship, still the same as it was those many months ago, had been waiting at the predetermined rendezvous. "Greetings," it returned the venturer's salute. "We are the Zaldi. We are united. We are ready to embrace the future." This time, Commander Ztali was alone as it crossed the vacuum between the two ships. The Venturer, nearly 300 meters long, dwarfed his primitive flagship. Ztali could pinpoint components on its hull that it recognized from its own species' designs, but all were larger, all were novel, and all were superior. It had once weighed its chances in a boarding action against humans, more than 2 months prior, when their first tiny craft made its way to Zaldi space. It knew intrinsically that no such boarding action could happen to the Venturer, not even a warship of the Unity, though such designs were always meant more for law enforcement than actual combat, would stand a chance against this great metal hulk. A hatchway in the Colossus' side opened up, and a white-suited human floated out to wave Ztali in. Ztali's HUD translated text automatically, so it could read the technical labels on the strange man-made equipment. It knew the cameras on its suit would be recording everything for review at Fleet Central.
"Commander Ztali,"
the space-suited human addressed it.
"My name is Sarah Tills. I've been appointed the ambassador for humankind. I and a small crew would like to stay in your star system, if at all possible."
She spoke using a translator chip, standard in all spacesuits to deal with language barriers. Zaldi crews in the United Fleet, hailing from 12 very different worlds, had used similar equipment to speak to their colleagues and crewmates. Refitting it to use an alien language was, thankfully, a simple task for both parties. Ztali hesitated. It tapped its manipulators against the airlock floor. "I am not equipped with authority to speak for the Zaldi Unity," it finally admitted. "If you wish, I can take you aboard my ship. From there we can contact Fleet Central." In the days following total Zaldi unification, Fleet Central had been named the capital of the Zaldi species.
"Oh, of course,"
Ambassador Tills exclaimed.
That would be wonderful.
All her life, she'd dreamt of finding friends among the stars. Now her dream had become a reality. The human race was blessed indeed. The human astronaut opened a pocket in her suit and handed Commander Zatali a computer drive. "What is it?" asked Zatali.
A data bank,
Said Ambassador Tills.
all of humanity's research so far, theoretical and practical, on extraterrestrial life.
Zaldi science in that sector had been entirely overturned. There was now far greater interest, sparked by the arrival of actual and literal aliens, but they had to start all the way from scratch. Knowledge in the field of xenobiological research was worth more than any other to the Zaldi, save for the secret of humanity's FTL drive. Commander Zatali took the data drive as if it were made of gold. "Thank you. On behalf of my species, thank you." It turned and gestured toward the flagship, the Unity. "I would be content to welcome you aboard my Unity." His Unity, his flagship, his pride and joy. It was tradition in the United Fleet for captains to address their spacefaring vessels in this fashion. It harkened all the way back to the first explorers on Atleb's methane seas, who plied the unknown in boats of sturdy copper and dared to risk their lives in search of new discoveries. The desire to know more was universal among sapient life. The Zaldi fleet's flagship, their greatest asset as they ventured into the unknown, was 100 meters long, pristine white on all sides and vaguely cylindrical. A massive fusion thruster was positioned at its rear, and a powerful sensor array sat fully charged at the bow. It had been probing the interstellar craft Venturer since the second ship's arrival. 3 of the Unity's 4 laser communicators were active, beaming a constant stream of information live at the speed of light. Technicians and officers stationed at Fleet Central, Fleet External, and the planet Sanleb gave constantly updating orders and feedback. Thousands of Zaldi, all the best in their field and very many being the best in their species, were actively involved in this historic second contact. A massive centrifuge revolved around the main hull of the Unity. The Venturer, like most Zaldi ships, relied entirely on her thrusters to generate G-forces and produce artificial gravity. Unlike most Zaldi ships, her drive was much more efficient, allowing it to be used constantly instead of in short bursts. Humanity's fleet, though still mostly confined to a single star, had long since discarded the Unity's centrifuge system as costly and unnecessary. Once again, they had the Zaldi beat. "This centrifuge is the crowning achievement of our space fleet. Vital to certain experiments, it can be run only in adjustable gravity," Commander Zatali explained. "Do humans use centrifuges?"
On stations,
said Ambassador Tills, maneuvering alongside her host to an airlock in the central hull. It was mostly filled with fuel tanks for the fusion drive, necessary for long journeys, but vital technical equipment was also commonly stored there.
Not ships. Our fusion drives provide thrust gravity.
"We use a similar method," Zatali said, grabbing firmly to the steel of a manipulator arm. They were equipped with handholds to help with maneuvering astronauts. Slowly, guided by a manipulator officer on the Unity's command deck, manipulators grabbed Zatali and its guest and guided them into the airlock.
"Why the manipulator arms?"
Ambassador Tills commented.
"Seems unnecessary."
"Tradition," explained Commander Zatali. "In the early days of spacefaring, manipulators would perform auxiliary roles as lifelines to drifting astronauts. If a crew member lost their grip during extravehicular activities, a manipulator officer could bring them in with an arm."
"Why not use tethers?"
asked the ambassador. Commander Zatali paused. "I do not know," it eventually confessed. "I am not an expert in our past as spacefarers, only the present." They entered the airlock, pushed gently by 2 massive metal arms. The outer hatch sealed shut behind them. The room began to fill with methane gas. Ambassador Tills checked her suit's outer sensors. "I understand you cannot breathe methane," said her host. Here is an oxygen bottle. The Zaldi Unity would not like to see you suffocate. It handed her a large orange bottle, with the Zaldi symbol for toxic emblazoned on its side. We use oxygen for experiments on occasion. Sarah Tills waved the bottle away.
Thank you, but no. My suit has 4 hours' worth of air.
Understandable. The airlock opened. Commander Ztali floated through it, followed by his guest. I will take you to the command deck. From there we may speak to Fleet Central. It handed Till's data drive to a passing officer as it floated by. Safeguard this drive and copy the data. Immediately. The Zaldi officer took the drive reverently and scuttled off down the cylindrical hall. There were panels on the walls meant to deploy into steps for a stairway under thrust gravity. But the main method of locomotion most crew members were using was a series of handholds along the outside of the hall. The airlock, Ambassador Tills had noticed, was designed so that it could be used in thrust or zero gravity. What do human ships look like? Asked Commander Ztali. A passing crew member, one of the engineering officers by the look of it, cast a few glances at the newly arrived human. Very few Zaldi had had the chance to see one in person. None had been seen outside their protective suits. Only the elites at Fleet Central, external and internal, plus a few devoted others even had detailed records on what a human might look like. There had been theories, creatures made entirely of water, amorphous blobs of fleshy slime, all crackpot ideas conceived of by armchair scientists and conspiracy theorists. Some even believed that humanity's idea that water planets had a chance of supporting life was pure deception. This was a belief entertained by even prominent scientists, all sapients of great repute and respect. No member of our species has seen much about humans.
Human ships. Well, there's a lot to go on.
Ambassador Tills paused, thinking.
The Lunars make fast, small, sterile craft, since Luna is low gravity, so they need less fuel to reach orbit. They don't even need space elevators.
Space elevators? What is this term? Asked Commander Ztali. The Zaldi Unity had no space elevators, as they were direct tethers between planets and space. Under the previous doctrine, where only the United Fleet was allowed space travel, such elevators were forbidden to be built.
Oh, space elevators are space stations connected to a planet via strong cables,
Sarah Tills happily explained. She was overjoyed at even speaking with an alien, much less asking it questions.
We use them to ship materials and personnel out of the gravity well.
I see. We call these stations orbital relays, said Commander Ztali, floating down the hall. They were forbidden up until very recently. Planetary authorities were not allowed to own space equipment for fear of war between worlds. Ztali reached a hatch at the end of the hall, reading Centrifuge Corridor 3 in Atlebi. The Zaldi Unity used Atlebi, the most widely spoken language, for all official writings and communications. The United Fleet used space planes, spacecraft capable of atmospheric travel, to airlift crews. Materials was harvested from asteroids and food was grown in hydroponic farms, it explained. This way no planetary authority could have power to exert on the United Fleet. It could remain impartial and detached as it was meant to be. Ztali clicked a button on the hatch. It would not open unless the centrifuge was inactive, for safety reasons. Deactivate the centrifuge.
Sounds like the United Nations,
said the ambassador. She glided to a stop just in front of the corridor. Commander Ztali twisted its handle clockwise, opening it. It was very clearly a thick bulkhead, meant to seal against decompression in the event of a hull breach. Protocol demanded that all doors be closed unless someone was passing through them.
They're based on Earth, but the same principle goes. An impartial peacekeeping body with power over all mankind. They're pretty effective when they want to be. The Venturer was an entirely UN project.
What was that sound? Asked Ztali, climbing through the centrifuge corridor. Between entirely and project. My translator failed.
It stands for United Nations. UN is the acronym.
Please call it the United Nations, said Commander Zatali. That sound you just made is unpronounceable by Zaldi. It would be like if I called the United Fleet. It broke into a series of chittering sounds, sounding vaguely like a hyena's laugh, mixed with a buzzsaw cutting wood. See? Incomprehensible.
Well, the translators could use some fine-tuning,
Tills admitted, following Commander Zatali.
We have a linguist on site to help with that, and a whole team of exobiologists.
Well, that's hardly necessary, Zatali scoffed, mildly offended. Zaldi science is competent enough.
Zaldi science maintained well into the space age that no planet's surface more than 30% covered in water could ever support life. I mean, no offense, but exobiology seems like a skill in which new experts are sorely needed.
Half the United Xenobiological Commission did resign thanks to humanity's arrival, Commander Zatali mused. I wonder if Fleet Central would let a human serve on that commission.
I really hope so.
They reached the end of the centrifuge corridor and opened the hatch. Commander Zatali let his guest climb inside first. Activate the centrifuge, it ordered. The hatch sealed behind them. The centrifuge began to spin. The corridor they now stood in was shaped like a ring, with the floor being the ring's inside and the ceiling facing outward. Thick portals in the ceiling, which could be sealed with blast doors at the press of a button, showed a view of the space outside. If one looked closely, they could see the fusion trails of Zaldi Unity spaceships going about their duties. The Unity's fusion wake stretched over 3 kilometers. Zatali did not want to know how long the Venturer's was.
What's Atleb's gravity like?
Asked Ambassador Tills. 1 standard G. Zatali paused. Oh. It did a brief mental calculation. Earth gravity is 0.67 standard Atleb Gs. This meant the gravity would be oppressive to a normal human, if not unmanageable. Thankfully, human spacesuits contained powered exoskeletons to lift heavy equipment, and their wearers were usually fit as well. Commander Zatali led its guests to the command deck, where United Fleet officers sat in their work alcoves. They all greeted it as it entered, too professional to pay their human visitor any undue attention. The best of the Zaldi were very good at their jobs. Open a channel to Fleet Central, Zatali ordered. It was done. Fleet Central, this is Unity. Venturer has arrived on schedule, bearing a gift of good faith in the form of xenobiological research data. Ambassador Sarah Tills, representing the human organization United Nations, requests permission to remain in Zaldi space while her vessel departs. It looked at Ambassador Tills, who nodded. Commander Zatali was the only Zaldi alive who understood the gesture. Response, barked the communications officer. Fleet Central thanks the United Nations for their gift and grants full permission for permanent habitation. Fleet Central also queries why their vessel is leaving. Commander Zatali turned to the only person there who'd know. She gave it an answer. The Venturer is a planetary survey ship. We were originally meant to scan the planet Mare Infinitum in the Tau Ceti system for colonization potential. Latin translated about the same as English. Humanity had discovered an infinite sea. Infinite sea? Commander Zatali gasped. The chair of the United Xenobiological Commission would probably have to resign again after this revelation. Already, Zaldi xenobiologists were beginning to disregard what they saw as an impossible form of science. It seems impossible to colonize, Zatali reasoned. No Zaldi would set foot on that world. Very few could survive the attempt. Well, we're not Zaldi. Ambassador Tills tapped on her wrist controls. Let me send you the initial survey file. Commander Zatali forwarded this to its systems officer, who was already busy compiling the research gift to send to Fleet Central. If I may, I am authorized to trade human technology in exchange for resources or materials. A material base this close to Mare Infinitum could be useful to establish a colony,
and negative energy drives would advance Zaldi spacefaring by leaps and bounds. You should consider it.
Commander Zatali did consider it. It ordered a message to be sent to Fleet Central, apprising them of the full situation. The response, delayed by only seconds thanks to light-speed communications, took 6 hours to return. "Response!" the communications officer shouted eagerly. "Mind your tone," Zatali admonished it, rushing over to read the message. "Oh my."
"What?"
Sarah Tills was peeking over what she assumed was its shoulder.
"What does it say?"
"I'm to assume your ship departs for Infinite Sea soon, yes?" asked the commander. This was confirmed. "And since negative energy technology requires time and energy to master, the Zaldi Unity will be unable to join you for..."
"A Horizon class, our smallest model with an Alcubierre drive, takes about 6 months to build."
6 months, Zatali ran a mental calculation. 206 Atlib days, plus more for testing and problem solving. Too long. It tapped a claw on the deck. "Ambassador, as I understand it, the Venturer will have space to spare in the absence of your crew." It wondered a bit cautiously exactly how Fleet Central would accommodate a Zaldi aboard a human ship. One breath of oxygen was fatal to them. "I have been authorized, if I wish, to join you."
"You would board the Venturer?"
Ambassador Till gasped.
"Its atmosphere is fatal to Zaldi."
"As is water. But some rewards require a risk." That was an old United Fleet proverb, taught by Zatali's mentor on their very first mission. The mentor in question died 3 years ago when micrometeors punctured its suit during a spacewalk. When one took too many chances, eventually they would lose. "It would be a delay of no more than..." Zatali calculated the numbers again. "1 Earth day to refit a compartment. The Zaldi Unity would provide all the materials needed, plus reasonable compensation."
"Why you?"
asked the ambassador. She already supported the idea.
"Why not a biologist or a surveyor?"
"I am a biologist," Zatali clarified, "and a surveyor." Commanders in the United Fleet had to be skilled in every trade. If an officer on a small ship were to be incapacitated, that vessel had likely lost its only expert in a field. Thus, specialization was frowned upon. Every crew member had to have a diverse set of skills. "And above all else, I am an explorer." It turned to a computer console, tapping a few brief commands into the control panel. A diagram of Mare Infinitum appeared on the screen. "Humanity was the first to show us our error, to destroy the very foundation of our biological science. It would be an honor to be able to rebuild it." It was decided then and there. 20 hours later, after a pompous ceremony at Fleet Central and a final systems check from the crew of the Unity, Commander Zatali became the first Zaldi in history to venture beyond the orbit of its home star. Within 7 days, it and its hosts would arrive at Tau Ceti. 3 after that, they would begin landing operations on Mare Infinitum. For decades, Zatali had devoted its life to learning what had previously been unknown, to discovering that which had previously been uncharted. Now, as it prepared to witness firsthand the denial of its wisest scientists, a strange thought crept into its mind. Commander Zatali, a member of a species to which an ocean meant death, was wondering how well it could swim.